You're listening to Be Radiant Radio. You are made of light and you are made to shine. Positive, uplifting, and helpful. Welcome to the show where you'll get informational and inspirational ideas on how to unleash your potential, get what you want in life, and shine like you're meant to. Hi, I'm Angela Loeb, and welcome to Be Radiant Radio. For today's episode, I want to focus on an important component that I have found that many people overlook in their career. Specifically, I want to talk about why it's important to cultivate your individual brand. And I want to give you some tips on how to figure it out so you can cultivate it. And by the way, I pulled this phrase, cultivating your individual brand, right out of one of my favorite career-related quotes. It's from something Tom Peters once said. He said, "In the new world of work, cultivating your individual brand, your, quote, saleable distinction, is not optional." Now, that new world of work that he was referring to was actually happening in 1997. That's when he wrote the article where that quote appears. In case you're wondering, the article is called "The Brand Called You." It was first published in an issue of the magazine, Fast Company magazine, in 1997, and they later republished it in 2006, which is when I spotted it. And you can still find it on the internet on fastcompany.com. I strongly recommend that you find it and read it. Get yourself a beverage. It's a long one, but it's so good. The interesting thing about Tom Peters and his timing, back then in 1997, there was no real way for individuals to cultivate their personal brand on the internet, not like we have today. This was way before social media. I mean, MySpace, that started in 2003. It didn't reach its heyday until 2005. Same thing with LinkedIn. It was launched in 2003. And many of us added our profiles, which meant we effectively were cultivating our brands online. But that was like in 2005, 2006. I mean, that's about the time when I first heard of it and joined it. And many of my colleagues got on LinkedIn as well. Now, after that, of course, came Facebook and Twitter, and the rest is history. But keep in mind that when Peters wrote his article, Mark Zuckerberg would have only been 13 years old. So, hello, this was pretty big stuff. I mean, he was talking about how companies could talk about their brands on the internet, but we, of course, didn't have that opportunity as individuals. So actually, back in 1997, what Tom Peters had to say was, it wasn't exactly new to talk about how to articulate your promise of value. I mean, after all, that's what he says. The brand is, by the way, in the article he talks about that, a brand is a promise of the value you'll receive. So your brand is your promise of value. But he was ahead of his time in a way. It was like he could see what was coming. And I don't mean he forced the social media revolution. I mean, maybe he did see that coming, but I don't know what. I'm talking about is that what I know about, because at the time I was a recruiter, and we were pretty happy to have a resume that was pretty straightforward. You stated your career objective, you reported the past tasks that you performed in your employment history, and you listed your education and training credentials. Pretty straightforward. But over the years, there's been a distinctive movement toward also including a sense of your personal brand on the resume. All of the resumes that I write with clients today, they have to articulate that person's promise of value. And I insist when I'm working with a client that they also provide me with evidence of that promise of value. It's not enough just to say this is what I can do and here's my individual brand. You have to provide proof of it too. So we're always adding success stories and accomplishment statements to the resumes these days, which means that what was once reserved for the interview is now also being included in our resume and in our online profile. Okay, so it's important to cultivate your brand because it's expected and because it's smart for your career success, but your brand can also be a great tool in helping you make good decisions about your career direction as well. So when you know that you'll get to use your promise of value, your individual brand, you know that it's the right career move to make. If you don't get to use it, then you don't make that career move. So that's why it's important to cultivate your brand. Now, let's talk about how to figure out your brand so you can cultivate it. The first step that I suggest you do is analyze or inventory, if you will, your career assets. By career assets, I mean your skills and knowledge, your natural talents, and your traits. These are the things that you possess and you offer the market, right, when you go out there into your career path. So determining your skills and knowledge, it's pretty much the easiest place to start, so we'll talk about that first. Skills are the things, very straightforward here, skills are the things that you learned or were trained to do, whether someone else taught you to do them or you taught yourself. So skills are learned. Learning to read, learning to type, learning how to use a software program on a computer, how to use social media. These are all learned, applied skills and knowledge. Now, natural talents, a little bit different, and they are just what they sound like. They come to you naturally, innately. Your natural talents were always there. Even as a child, you probably had, like some clues about your natural talents. And you probably take them for granted since they're such a part of you, such an important kind of embedded part of you. Think about the things which come really easily to you. You might even have trouble understanding why something that seems so easy to you is hard for someone else. That's a clue that you're talking about a talent here versus a skill, which, of course, is something you learn. And they are really connected, skills and talents, of course. A lot of times you have a talent and you will develop the talent by actually gaining skills. To demonstrate what I mean and to show you how so intrinsic they are to each other, let's look at a music example. My favorite example is to use Miles Davis. He's a jazz trumpet musician, and he seems to have had a natural talent for music. And in fact, the album Kind of Blue, it's one of the top selling jazz records of all time, still today. You have to have talent to achieve that kind of a feat, right? However, he didn't just come out of the womb knowing how to play jazz music on a trumpet. He started taking lessons, acquiring music skills when he was 13 years old. So another 13-year-old story here. By the way, Miles Davis's individual brand could be summed up in one word. He was cool. Now that's what I call a great brand, a cool brand. He's cool. Taking stock of your career assets now, that includes taking a look at, of course, like I just said, your skills and your talents, but also your personal traits. Now, traits specifically describe how you do your work in the world. They're adjectives that describe your personality or your behavioral style. So a list of your traits could include words like self-directed, assertive, persuasive, adventurous, innovative, dependable, and so on. What I suggest you do is create a list of your traits. You can find traits online. Just type it into your browser and a search, and you'll find lots of stuff out there about traits. But an easy way to do this, the best list I've ever seen is in the book, What Color is Your Parachute by Richard Bowles. So I really like his list. It's a good one. And, of course, related to a lot of the traits we use in our career. Now, choose from a list. Go ahead and look at all these traits that you can find and pick your top 5. And then I dare you to actually look and hone it down some more and pick your number 1 out of that list, your top go-to trait. What's the number 1 thing? Like, you can't help yourself. You're always going to really kind of go to that trait, no matter what you're doing. Now, I have a warning for you. I want you to be as honest as you can in this exercise. You might be tempted to just list traits that you admire, but they might not really be representative of your style. Also, you want to be aware that you own it, that you put traits down that you actually own, because maybe you're not considering yourself in a full. But what I mean is this. This is a good way to get an authentic read on your traits. Ask others who know you to help you, especially if you're struggling to be objective about yourself. For example, I was the firstborn in my family, and because I had to step up when I was really young to help care for my 3 younger siblings, I've always seen myself, and I really am, dependable and responsible. So, of course, those traits are on my list. It's pretty obvious. But when my sister saw my list, this was years ago when I did my inventory of traits, I showed her my list. and she pointed out that I seem to have a tendency, and she's right, to ignore my adventurous side, since I didn't include it as one of my top 5 traits. So she was right, and I needed to include that. So it is helpful to get other people's opinion on this. Another way to authenticate your traits is by taking an assessment, a behavioral or personality assessment. My favorite is StrengthsFinder 2.0. StrengthsFinder 2.0. You'll buy a book by Tom Rath, and in the back you can get a code and you can go online and take the assessment. It's a really good one. I like the results. It'll show you your top 5 strengths, or what they like to call themes. And of all of the assessments out there, I like it best because it's super accessible. You buy a book. It's pretty easy. And it's also easy to read the results. You don't have to have a PhD in psychology or be certified in a certain assessment or go work with a coach to get the results and make sense of them. And it's affordable. It's just basically the cost of the book. I like that it'll give you some vocabulary, and that can be very helpful in figuring out your personal brand. All right. So once you've taken stock of your career assets, there are 2 more ingredients that go into making your individual brand, and that's passion and accomplishments. It's really passion, but the accomplishments plays a role here, an important role. So we'll get to that in a second. So yes, you have the whole recipe now. Take your skills, talents, and traits, then add in your passion, and top it off with your accomplishments. There you go. There's the soupy mix of how to figure it out. Now let's talk a little bit about these last 2 ingredients, the passion and the accomplishments. Do you know what you're passionate about? Hey, maybe you don't. It's okay. It happens a lot. That's why people come to work with me. They want to figure this stuff out. I've learned not to make assumptions that people know about this. I mean, it's hard to find the time to sit around and self-reflect. Life is busy. Life is distracting. I once asked a client what she enjoys doing in her spare time, and she remarked, "What spare time?" So I get it. But you're taking the time to think about it right now. Yay! So pat yourself on the back. Anyway, if you're struggling to answer the question outright, what is my passion, then I suggest you answer this really good question instead. What do I enjoy doing so much that I lose track of time while I'm doing it? Of course, in a good way. You lose track of time. Before you know it, boom, time has zoomed by. You haven't had even a sense of time passing. That's a really good indication that you're working in something that is a passion of yours. Or perhaps you prefer this variation. This is another way to look at it, which is, what tasks do I enjoy doing that energize me? So yes, it's as simple as that, answering what makes you lose track of time, in a good way, of course, or put another way, what can you do all day long that energizes you and you still have energy at the end of the day? These will, in effect, one of these or both of these will, in effect, answer the question, what is my passion? And what's great is that these variations, they'll help you narrow the focus to work-related passion versus just outright answering the question, what is my passion? Okay, excellent. Now, on to the final ingredient. Let's look at your accomplishments. Sometimes it's hard to be objective about what we do really well. First of all, we live in the skin we're in, and it's hard to look at ourselves from the outside and be objective. Secondly, we've also been taught that it's not polite to brag and talk about our accomplishments. But hey, like the old saying that goes, it ain't bragging if it's true. So we're not talking about bragging. We're actually, the point of this is we're looking for evidence. Not so we can brag, although let's face this, we are expected to discuss our accomplishments when it comes time to look for a job or during a performance review. So if you want to promote through your career, you have to actually able to talk about the things you have done, how you've made impact in those accomplishments. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the point about how is this important in the personal brand. We want evidence so that you can clearly point and say, yeah, that I'm showing up and doing that thing that when you carry out your promise of value, as Peters would say, well, then you will create value. You will get results, that impact that you're making. So it's an important piece, an important ingredient in figuring out your individual brand. Now, what you want to do is you want to think about when you got results, when you made a positive impact on and when we're looking at it from a team perspective or a career perspective here, we want to see impact on your team, your customers, the community, the bottom line, productivity, etc. Just think about how you've made an impact on some of those things or all of those things in a way that it let you use both your career assets that we talked about before, your traits, your strengths, your skills, and your passion. So you did something that you actually enjoyed doing, that you got something out of, you were all in, right? So go ahead and answer that question. What is my proudest professional accomplishment? Now, after you've inventoried your career assets and you've answered these questions about passion and accomplishment, you can put it all together and you can come up with that personal brand. But I also suggest go read Tom Peters' great article, The Brand Called You. He will give you further insight on all of this and tell you about how to make your brand visible as well in your career. It's a great read. I really strongly recommend it. And on that note, I want to leave you with some of his comments from the article. And I love how he doesn't pull any punches. He gets right into the heart of the matter here. He says, if you're really smart, you figure out how to distinguish yourself from all the other very smart people walking around with $1,500 suits, high-powered laptops, and well-polished resumes. Along the way, if you're really smart, you figure out what it takes to create a distinctive role for yourself. You create a message and a strategy to promote the brand called you. And he goes on to say this, and I found this very inspiring. He says, start right now. As of this moment, you're going to think of yourself differently. You're not an employee of General Motors. You're not a staffer at General Mills. You're not a worker at General Electric or a human resource at General Dynamics. Oops, it's gone, he says. A little humor in the article there. Forget the generals, he goes on to say. You don't belong to any company for life, and your chief affiliation isn't to any particular function. You're not defined by your job title, and you're not confined by your job description. I love that. I'm going to say it again, you're not defined by your job title, and you're not confined by your job description. Start today. You are a brand. Oh, I love that. So I'll leave it with you right there. Hopefully you're inspired to figure it out and cultivate your individual brand. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Be Radiant Radio. I'll let you go now. But before we do, real quick reminder, if you want to reach me, you want to connect, you want to learn more about my services, or maybe you just want to check out the loads of resources I have on my website, here's the best way. Just go to angelaloeb.com. Thanks again. And until next time, keep on shining like you're meant to.